So our company's NGT Energy, and we prepared this presentation for people interested in wastewater. Now, Mary mentioned a little bit about my background. For the last 17 years, I've been preparing entrepreneurs for investment and providing strategic and financial advisory services. And in that time, we've seen thousands of inventions. And in fact, one company that I co-founded does back office processing for US insurance agencies and brokerages. And we offshored all the work that we do to India. And that company continues to grow. It's very, Patracorp is the name of the company, and they're doing an incredible job. But looking at all these inventions, I found one that was world changing, and I just had to be part of it. And that was what they were doing was creating nanobubbles and using them in an aerobic digester. And it was very interesting because, theoretically, all the work had been done in getting already in the wastewater treatment plant and consuming organic material. And then they were trucking out truckloads of water and sludge and putting it on fields. And that can be the basis. If you don't do a good job of treating the sludge coming out of a wastewater treatment plant, then when you're putting on the fields can be contaminated and can be the beginning of people getting sick from wastewater. In this case, that trucking was really expensive, and this technology was applied, or at least the predecessor to our technology was applied, and the amount of waste was reduced by 80%. So it was very exciting, and I wanted to be part of it. Then when we got a hold of it, we started making a list of all the different markets that we could impact with the technology in all the different places, and we got so excited. Because we discovered that it was a technology that could be a platform technology. And by platform, we mean same technology working across multiple markets, whether it's wastewater, whether it's oil and gas and the wastewater coming from that, whether it's cleaning water to grow plants or fish or animals, or even cleaning water to better clean up healthcare so that you can kill dangerous viruses and bacteria. What makes nanobubbles special, and now I bet you've all become somewhat familiar with them, but what makes them special are a few things. So the size of the bubble makes a difference. We see nanobubbles are generally less than 375 nanometers in size. There's a lot of pretenders out there saying, oh, we make microbubbles or we make micro nanobubbles. Microbubbles are generally greater than 375 nanometers. And here's some of the differences. So microbubbles vary in size. That size difference in the bigger bubbles gives them a rise rate, whereas nanobubbles don't have a rise rate. The surface tension of the liquid is greater than the buoyancy of the bubble, so they don't rise like normal bubbles. And that's really the key for a wastewater treatment. But when you have bubbles that vary in size, that means they're rising. And one question you could ask those to find out if you have true nanobubbles is you just ask, well, how fast are the bubbles rising? And if they say anything but the bubbles don't rise, you know you're really talking about microbubbles. It's been very difficult to track down nanobubbles because you can't see them in a normal light-based microscope, in a regular microscope, because 375 nanometers is smaller than the wavelength of light. And so, but you can see them with a laser, and you can now measure them with a device called dynamic light scattering that Malvern Nanosite makes. And so we can see how many are there. One of the things that sets them apart is they have high internal pressure. Microbubbles have low internal pressure, and that pressure is maintained by having a consistent charge within and then negative charge outside the bubble. And what's cool about that is that's like two south poles of magnets trying to come together. They're not going to connect. And so that's what keeps the bubbles separate and keeps them from aggregating. And when you keep them separate, that means you have all these bubbles, and it means that you're creating huge amounts of extra surface area for reactive processes. So just to give you an idea of the magnitude, if you think about a normal surface bubble, you might be looking at you know, something on this size, a coarse bubble. We see fine bubble generators, which the industry has gone to. Those are micro bubble generators. They might be, you know, maybe as small as 1 micrometer, usually around 10. And there's limited amounts that you could have in the liquid. Here we have milliliters, and we're looking at 10 to the 6th or 10 to the 7th milliliters. Microbubbles can be 10 to the 8th or even into the 10 to the 9th number of bubbles per milliliter, and they're much smaller, like we said. So let's just give you an idea. This is water that you think this all looks the same. And here we're going to show a laser shining through some of this water. And so this has some oxygen nanobubbles in it. And the cup on the left side, you can see has oxygen nanobubbles, and we're shining a laser light through it. And you can see up and down that column, the laser light is going through, yet there's regular water to the right with no nanobubbles in it. You see no laser light diffraction. So this is actually bouncing off clouds of nanobubbles that are throughout the column. And throughout the column is really key because they're not rising. So they're usable by bacteria and other things in the water. Now, there are a number of ways that nanobubbles are being made today. And those include membranes as being a very popular way, and they work great if you want to make nanobubbles. Oh, yeah, a question? Okay.
Please carry on.
They work great if you have a clean source of water. So the challenge is if there's any kind of possibility that there could be a buildup over time, the membranes clog up and they become difficult to maintain. So if we're treating wastewater, it's a challenge because we don't want to use a freshwater source in order to clean up our wastewater. We want to use that same wastewater source. So we want something that doesn't clog up. There's also in creating nanobubbles, you have some challenges in scalability because everybody touts this great information about how many nanobubbles they have per liter. Again, they might be 10 to the 8th bubbles per milliliter. But it turns out that many of the tools out there that get there, they only get there with recirculating through their system 5 times. So when you say, how much water does your system treat, and they have a quote, you may have to divide that by 5 times if you want a full concentration of nanobubbles. So it makes it difficult to scale for large bodies of water. What we do is we create nanogas nanobubbles in solution. And we've measured over 500 billion nanobubbles per liter, essentially, you know, 5 times 10 to the 8 milliliters. And you can see a clear set of water. You can see how this green laser light is showing there's clouds of nanobubbles in there. Now, if you're using it for wastewater treatment, one of the ways to use it that's fantastic is getting high levels of dissolved oxygen in solution. And if we think about dissolved oxygen, you might be familiar with Henry's law that says for a given temperature and pressure, you can only measure so much dissolved oxygen in a fluid. And so some DO sensors only go up to 20 because tap water might be only 0 to maybe 14 at the most. With our nanogas bubbles, we'd measure dissolved oxygen levels up to 140 parts per million. And here we're showing a YSI device at 64 degrees, normal temperature, normal pressure, atmospheric pressure, and we're measuring 52 parts per million of dissolved oxygen. So what can you do with that? We'll talk about that in a minute. One of the other things that we get with our nanobubbles is it becomes scalable. So rather than saying you need to run it through our system 5 times, we can actually put, let's say, 5 gallons of water into 5 gallons of nanobubble water into 45 gallons of regular tap water or source water. And we end up with 50 gallons. And here we're showing those 50 gallons have 38 parts per million of dissolved oxygen. So we multiplied the water that we're treating 9 times. We just take a side stream. And so that means we can start treating large bodies of water. So let's look at some of those. Now, in municipal wastewater, you may have, I know that last session, Dave talked about ponds that are covered with harmful algal blooms. And one of the common ways to treat water that are low cost that villages and municipalities use is they use a pond and they let water and the air flowing over it and anaerobic bacteria in the bottom treat that pond. What you can end up with is stinky pond that becomes algae covered. This is in the US. It's most likely cyanobacteria, a harmful algal bloom on part of that pond. It's got stinky algae covered. And in fact, I want to show you a bit about this pond that we're just finishing up treating right now. So this is a typical flow in structure for a pond that when at its inception was probably very well designed. So they actually have 3 ponds. The sewage comes into the first pond here. And if you look carefully, you can see kind of this dark area here. And that is at the very influx of the pond. This pond is near or over capacity. And so they're starting to build up sludge islands of waste. And that's what we're seeing here. And so they start treating the waste here. The water flows through pond 1 into pond 2. Pond 2 is where we saw that harmful algal bloom. And then it flows into pond 3. And the hope is that the pond is working, that now we have water that's releasable and can be land applied in pond 3 without creating any harm to the environment and without getting people sick. But it turns out that if this is over capacity, then what you're releasing in from pond 3 is dangerous. And in fact, they were having to empty pond 3 once or twice a week because the water just built up so quickly in this treatment solution. You also get problems with wastewater if you're lucky enough to have a sewer system in a city, either open or closed sewer system. You get iron sulfide and hydrogen sulfide, especially hydrogen sulfide, building up those sewers. And if you've been by them particular stinky sewers, that's coming from the emulsion or the ammonia or the hydrogen sulfide that's built up. And some of you are familiar with systems that might work in lift stations to reduce that stink and reduce the hydrogen sulfide. In addition, when you have infused oxygen, if you're trying to create, if you're just trying to create oxygen, you're trying to put it into water, and you have low pressure situations, which can happen in some of these sewers, then the oxygen just bubbles out. And in fact, one of the challenges of these ponds, they don't use any aeration because they're shallow. And anytime you have a shallow pond or lagoon, it's hard to use aeration because the bubbles just come out too fast and they don't place enough oxygen in the water. So what we're talking about with nanobubbles is the real difference. So if you compare, if you think about it, there's about 21% oxygen in the air. With a nanobubble, you might have as much as 25% oxygen transfer efficiency. With fine bubbles, the best you might see is 30%. And so when you look at oxygen transfer, you might get, if you're using air, if you're using oxygen, you might be around 20% of the oxygen going into, and you might be able to get 20% oxygen transfer versus just 6.3% with a fine bubbler. So in other words, if you're using air, you're not going to get a lot of oxygen transfer. You're going to use a lot of energy to get there. And so we could be as much as 320% more oxygen, more efficient, and pure oxygen could get you close to 90, 95% oxygen transfer efficiency. So only 5 or 10% of the energy put in wasted with oxygen that might come out. So let's talk about the situation that we talked about with that pond. We worked with our partner, Alpha Omega Resources, and you can see them here doing the kind of checking you need to do. Solutions like Dave Shackleton's go hand in hand with what we're doing because you have to combine a collection of solutions. And so the first thing you start with, though, is let's define the problem. And that's where a lot of people say, oh, I've got a solution. Let me just throw it in there and it'll fit. And that's not true. We need to diagnose what the problem is. It's like going to a doctor and you go to the doctor and you walk in and they say, oh, I know exactly what's wrong. Here's some medicine. This will solve your problem. Thank you very much. And you go, wait a second. I didn't even tell you what was wrong with me. How do I know this is going to work? So it's true for wastewater too. We need to diagnose the problem in order to have the right solution. So here we are going out. What we did in this lagoon is we did bathymetric testing, which is almost like a sonar that tells us exactly how much sludge and what level it is in the water. We did some sludge testing too, and then now there are solutions for DNA testing to tell us what kind of bacteria is in that sludge as well. So all of that was done to characterize what was going on with this pond before we started. And that ends up, you think, oh, that's just going to increase our cost. That ends up lowering the cost because you end up with the right solution. So we did all that testing beforehand. And that second pond was covered with that algal bloom. In just one day, we saw that starting to clear up. And at the end of 2 weeks, it had returned to its normal state. Some algae in that pond is good because beneficial algae, but it's no longer that harmful algal bloom covering the surface and having bugs walking all over it. So within 2 months, we saw over 1 foot of sludge reduction, and we saw the algal bloom disappear, and we saw the sludge islands beginning to disappear as well. And in fact, with that we added that 1 foot sludge reduction it was almost like adding a whole nother pond to the solution. And now what we did was the sludge has been reduced from about 3 feet 3 inches down to 2 feet 3 inches. And total suspended solids, and it's much looser on the bottom, and total suspended solids was reduced in this 2-month period from about 3 feet down to 6 inches. So a huge amount of sludge and organic material was chewed up. So instead of having to dredge these lagoons to turn them back into usefulness, we were able to apply this nanobubbles. Now, it wasn't just nanobubbles, though. It was a solution like Dave's with enzymes. It was the right bacteria applied based on the DNA testing. And it was monitoring the gas and the liquid to make sure that we were maintaining about 2 ppm dissolved oxygen. So all of those things work together to make this all work. Another area, we talked about the sewage collection systems and the stink you have associated with wastewater sometimes. You get iron sulfide and hydrogen sulfide. We're doing some work in the oil industry where we see this kind of buildup. And the oil industry pumps water out of the ground. In the US, they pump 7 times more water than they pump oil out of the ground. And so they have to get rid of it. And you see on the left here is the type of water they have after they've taken the oil, after they've gotten most of the oil out. There's still some oil in here. And you look at the stuff on the right side and you go, oh, there, I still see the oil, but that's not true. This is after treatment. This is just iron sulfide and hydrogen sulfide in the water. So we went to that site, and with our oxygen nanobubbles, we treated that. Here was the beginning water, and here's the end water of what we were treating on site. So that's working differently than the biological treatment you want for a pond. You're getting a chemical redox reaction with that oxygen. And it happens quickly because you have very small bubbles with much more surface area that are able to react more quickly on a chemical basis. So we take out chemical oxygen demand you see sometimes in industrial wastewater, as well as redox reactions like you do with hydrogen sulfide. Our system is completely automated. We can see it over the web. So it could be on the cell phone, or we can see it monitored on our computers. And the idea is that we want to collect the data so that we can eventually apply artificial intelligence and get smarter and smarter about how the equipment is maintained and about how to apply the gases, the nanobubbles, to the solution. One of the biggest challenges with putting great solutions out there is making sure they're continuing to work. So one of the ways we've stepped up to think about solving that is, instead of selling equipment, we think about renting it and monitoring what's going on, including a whole service solution that we need people on the ground to provide, to make sure that things keep working. Because if you let the equipment break down, if you don't use it, then your solution, you spent all this money and you haven't gotten the results. During the development of the technology, it was tried out on the Mithi River through Mumbai. And that is exactly the kind of problem we were describing, with this incredible stink flowing through the city. At least it was at that point in time, and maybe that's been solved by now. But the developmental versions of the technology were taken to Mumbai, applied to the river. The stink went away, and the fish started jumping where the solution was applied. It was also tested by the US Navy on Naval bilge water, and we can see what that looks like. And the organic process took that bilge water from dark to, again, consuming all the organic material, including the hydrocarbons, including the oils and greases. We've got, this process is patented. We've got 18 granted patents and 30 pending, plus trade secrets. So we think that by applying solutions like this with nanobubbles, you can solve global water and food needs. And I'm open to questions, and I see there's some things some comments in the chat.